Now that your husband is gone, it is time you faced reality and moved somewhere more appropriate. My daughter-in-law announced over coffee. My son nodded in agreement. This place was never really meant for someone your age anyway. I left without arguing. The next morning, I visited my bank, and what I discovered there changed everything. Follow my journey to the end, and share what city you are watching from. I am amazed how far these stories travel, and connect people who understand what real family loyalty means. The kitchen had never felt so empty, even with both of them sitting across from me at my vintage Formica table. 3 weeks had passed since we laid Harold to rest. 3 weeks since I would stood at that graveside feeling like someone had reached into my chest and torn out essential organs. I didn't know I needed to survive. The grief wasn't just sadness, it was a physical ache that started in my bones and radiated outward, making my morning coffee taste like ash and turning familiar rooms into foreign landscapes. At 73, I had thought I understood loss. I had buried my parents, said goodbye to childhood friends, watched neighbors disappear from porches where we had shared decades of evening conversations. But losing Harold felt like losing my native language. We had spent 38 years building a private world of shared glances, inside jokes, and comfortable silences. Now I found myself reaching for words that no longer existed, trying to share observations with someone who would never again murmur his understanding from behind the morning newspaper. "Pass the sugar, please, Eleanor," my daughter-in-law said, her voice carrying that peculiar sharpness it always held when addressing me. Crystal had always called me Eleanor. Never Mom, never even Ellie like my friends did. After 16 years of marriage to my son, she still maintained that formal distance that made family dinners feel like business meetings. Derek sat between us, mechanically eating the banana bread I had made from Harold's favorite recipe. My 45-year-old son had inherited his father's broad shoulders and methodical nature, but somewhere along the way, he had lost Harold's warmth. These days, Derek seemed more like Crystal's spokesperson than my child. "The funeral was lovely," I offered, desperate to fill the silence that felt heavier than grief. "Your father would have appreciated seeing so many of his old construction crew there. Those men really respected him." Crystal set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision, the sound echoing in my small kitchen. "Yes, well, that is actually why we wanted to talk with you today, Eleanor." Something in her tone made my stomach flutter with unease. She had that same controlled expression she wore when delivering news that benefited her but disappointed others. "What do you mean?" I asked, though part of me already sensed trouble brewing. Crystal straightened in her chair, and I recognized the shift immediately. The way her shoulders squared and her voice took on that measured tone she used when delivering news that would benefit her. "Look, Eleanor, Derek and I have been talking about your situation." She paused, glancing at my son as if seeking permission to continue. We are worried about you rattling around in this big house all by yourself." The words hit me oddly. Worried about what exactly? Well, Crystal's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "You have to admit, maintaining a place this size isn't exactly practical for someone in your situation." I felt my spine stiffen. "My situation?" Derek shifted uncomfortably, finally speaking up. "Mom, what Crystal's trying to say is that we think this house might be too much for you now. The upkeep, the expenses." He gestured vaguely around the kitchen that Harold and I had renovated together 15 years ago. "It is a lot for anyone to handle alone." The words felt like physical blows. This wasn't just my house. It was the 3-bedroom Rambler Harold and I had bought as newlyweds, where we had painted every room together, where Derek had taken his first steps, where we had hosted Christmas mornings and birthday parties and anniversary celebrations. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked, though the answer was already forming like ice in my stomach. Crystal's expression shifted into what she probably thought was compassionate concern. "We think you should consider downsizing. Perhaps one of those nice senior living communities in Apple Valley. They have activities, meal plans, transportation services, It would be so much more appropriate than rattling around alone in this big empty house. I turned to Derek, searching his face for any sign of disagreement, any indication that he remembered this house as his childhood home rather than an inconvenient burden. Derek, surely you don't think I should sell the house where you grew up, where your father and I built our entire life together? Mom, it makes financial sense, he said, finally meeting my eyes but only briefly. Crystal's right about the maintenance costs. And honestly, we could really use the space. We have been talking about expanding our family, and this neighborhood has excellent schools. The implication hit me like a sledgehammer. They didn't just want me gone, they wanted my house. This home that Harold and I had paid off years ago, that we would carefully maintained and improved room by room, that held every important memory of our marriage. Now that your husband is gone, Crystal said, dropping all pretense of sympathy, it is time you faced reality and moved somewhere more appropriate. This place was never really meant for someone your age anyway. A woman living alone needs security, not space. The casual cruelty of her words, the dismissive way she referred to Harold as your husband rather than Derek's father, the assumption that my age automatically disqualified me from independence, all of it crystallized into a moment of devastating clarity. Derek actually smiled and nodded. She is absolutely right. Dad's gone now, and you need to be practical about your situation. This house represents equity that could set you up comfortably in a senior community while giving us a fresh start. I see, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. Inside, something fundamental was shifting, not just heartbreak, but a complete recalibration of my understanding of family loyalty. I need to think about this. 2 weeks, Crystal announced, as if my timeline was hers to dictate. That should give you plenty of time to research facilities and contact a realtor. The housing market is excellent right now, so there is no point in delaying. 2 weeks, not months to grieve and plan, not even a reasonable timeline to process such a monumental life change. 2 weeks to dismantle 38 years of memories and surrender the home Harold and I had built together. I excused myself and walked to the bedroom Harold and I had shared, where his reading glasses still sat on the nightstand and his favorite cardigan hung in the closet. The room still carried the faint scent of his aftershave, and I sat on our bed, staring at my reflection in the dresser mirror. The woman looking back seemed older than 73. Her gray hair limp and her green eyes clouded with shock and grief. In 2 weeks, I would have to pack up 38 years of marriage and surrender it all to a son who had just told me I was too old to live in my own home. But as I sat there in the gathering dusk, something else began to stir beneath the pain and disbelief. A small, hard kernel of determination. Harold had always been meticulous about our finances, insisting I understand our situation even when I preferred to let him handle the details. Tomorrow I would start making calls. I would visit the bank and review our accounts, understand exactly what I owned and what options I had. Because if Derek and Crystal thought they could simply erase me from this family without consequences, they might discover they had underestimated the woman Harold had spent 38 years teaching to be thorough. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window as I sat alone with my coffee. 12 days after that devastating conversation, Derek and Crystal had already visited twice to help me plan, measuring rooms and discussing renovation possibilities, as if I had already signed over the deed. Yesterday, I would overheard Crystal on the phone with a contractor, scheduling estimates for once the old woman clears out. The casual dismissiveness of that phrase had stung more than I had expected, reducing me to an obstacle to be removed. Rather than Derek's mother who had lived here for 4 decades, I had spent those 12 days in a strange haze, mechanically sorting through possessions while wrestling with the growing anxiety about my future. But this morning, I finally felt ready to face the financial realities Harold would have expected me to understand. The drive to First State Bank took me through neighborhoods where Harold and I had walked our old Beagle, past the elementary school where Derek had played Little League, through the commercial district where we had shopped for groceries and celebrated anniversaries at Luigi's Italian restaurant. Every block held memories of the life we had built in this community. Margaret Chen, the bank manager, greeted me with the careful sympathy people reserved for recent widows. "Mrs. Anderson, I was so sorry to hear about Harold. He was such a gentleman, always asking about my daughter's college plans. Thank you, Margaret. He mentioned your Amy often, especially when she was applying to engineering programs." I settled into the chair across from her desk, my purse clutched tightly in my lap. "I am afraid I need to understand our financial situation better. Harold managed everything, and I feel completely lost." Margaret's expression softened with understanding. "Of course, that is completely normal. Let me pull up your accounts, and we will go through everything together." She turned to her computer, fingers clicking across the keyboard. After a moment, her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Oh my, is something wrong?" My heart jumped. Had Derek somehow already gained access to our accounts? "Not wrong, exactly," Margaret said carefully. "It is just that there are more accounts here than I was expecting for a standard checking and savings setup." She printed several pages and spread them across her desk. "Let me start with your joint household account. This balance was modest but sufficient to cover my basic expenses for several months if I was careful." Relief washed over me. At least I wouldn't be immediately destitute. "There is also your joint savings account," Margaret continued, sliding another statement toward me. This balance was substantially larger, enough to sustain me comfortably for years if managed properly. "That is wonderful," I said, feeling some tension leave my shoulders. "Harold was always diligent about saving." "Yes, he was very systematic," Margaret agreed. "But Mrs. Anderson, I am showing several additional accounts that I need to verify with you. Some appear to be in your name exclusively." "My name only," I echoed, confused. "That doesn't sound right. Harold handled all our banking." Margaret's fingers moved across the keyboard again. "According to our records, there are 5 additional accounts, 3 certificates of deposit, a money market account, and what appears to be a business trust account established 6 years ago." My head began to spin. "I don't understand any of this. Harold never mentioned business accounts or trusts." Margaret leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle but probing. "Mrs. Anderson, did your husband ever express concerns about family financial pressures? Sometimes clients establish protective accounts when they are worried about inheritance disputes or external demands." The question caught me completely off guard. External demands, what could Harold have been worried about? Margaret printed more statements and handed them to me. The numbers seemed impossible. These weren't small emergency funds. These were substantial amounts that could buy a house, could provide comfortable living for decades. "How is this possible?" I whispered. "I never signed anything for these accounts." "Actually, you did," Margaret said gently, retrieving a thick file folder. "Your signatures are on all the documentation. It appears Harold brought you in periodically to sign papers, probably explaining them as routine updates or insurance forms." I stared at the documents she showed me. Recognizing my own handwriting on papers, I didn't remember signing, but looking at the dates, I could place some of them now. The day we had updated our emergency contact information after Derek moved. The afternoon we had switched to a new type of savings account with better interest rates. Harold had never lied to me, but he had been strategically vague about the full implications of what I was signing. He was protecting me, I said, the realization dawning slowly. But from what? Margaret consulted her computer screen again. "Mrs. Anderson, there is something else. The trust account has been receiving regular transfers from a business account for the past 6 years. Anderson Custom Renovations Trust. Wasn't that your husband's company?" "Yes, but Harold sold the business when he retired. Derek told me the sale barely covered outstanding debts and equipment loans." Margaret's expression grew puzzled. "According to our records, Anderson Custom Renovations is still operating. There have been consistent deposits and transfers throughout this period. Mrs. Anderson, I think you need to speak with your husband's business accountant. There may be significantly more to your financial picture than you realize." I left the bank in a daze, my purse heavy with account statements and documentation. Instead of driving home immediately, I pulled into the parking lot of Caribou Coffee and sat in my car, studying every page Margaret had given me. The numbers told a story I had never known existed. Harold had been systematically building a financial fortress around me, ensuring I would never be dependent on anyone's charity or goodwill. Every account, every investment, every trust was structured to guarantee my independence. As I examined the trust account statements more carefully, a pattern emerged. The deposits corresponded with Derek's visits over the past 6 years, always larger amounts following occasions, when Derek had mentioned financial stress, or when Crystal had made comments about their expensive lifestyle. Harold had been helping our son financially, but he had been simultaneously protecting an equal or greater amount for my future security, as if he had known that someday I might need to stand completely alone. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Mom, Crystal found a great realtor who specializes in quick sales. She can come by tomorrow to do a market evaluation. Hope you are making progress on finding a new place. I stared at the message for a long moment, then looked again at the bank statements spread across my passenger seat. Derek and Crystal were so confident, so certain they controlled all the variables in this situation. They had no idea their assumptions were built on incomplete information. Tomorrow I would call Harold's business accountant and learn exactly what other surprises my husband had left behind. Tonight, I would decide what to do with the knowledge that Harold had loved me enough to ensure I would never be at anyone's mercy, not even our own sons. The grief was still there, as sharp and overwhelming as ever. But underneath it, something else was growing. A quiet strength I hadn't felt in years. Harold hadn't just protected my financial future, he had given me the power to choose my own path. The office of Patel and Associates occupied a modest suite in a strip mall between a nail salon and a pet grooming service. I had never been here before. Harold had always handled business meetings himself, claiming the financial details would bore me and that he preferred to handle such matters personally. Now I understood he had been shielding me from more than tedium. Raj Patel appeared to be about 50, with graying temples and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He had been managing Anderson Custom Renovations books for 12 years, and his expression when I had called yesterday had carried a note of surprise. "Mrs. Anderson," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his organized desk. "First, please accept my deepest condolences." Harold was an exceptional man and an honest businessman. I looked forward to our quarterly meetings because he always had stories about your garden and your volunteer work at the library. "Thank you, Raj. I wish I could say I knew him as well in business as you did." I settled into the chair, my purse containing yesterday's bank statements. "I am trying to understand our financial situation," and the bank mentioned ongoing business income that came as a complete surprise. Raj's eyebrows rose significantly. "A surprise? That is quite unusual. Harold spoke about you constantly, and I assumed you were fully informed about the business operations. Please, I need to understand what has been happening. My son told me the business was sold years ago and barely covered its debts." "Sold?" Raj looked genuinely bewildered. "Mrs. Anderson Custom Renovations wasn't sold. It was restructured." He turned to his computer, pulling up files. 6 years ago, Harold transferred ownership of all business assets into a trust, the Anderson Custom Renovations Trust. You are listed as the sole beneficiary. The room seemed to tilt slightly. "I own the renovation business." "Actually, the trust owns the business, and you own the trust," Raj clarified. "It has been quite profitable, Mrs. Anderson. Your husband was very strategic about the projects he accepted after restructuring: residential remodels, steady clients, reliable income, rather than the unpredictable nature of large commercial contracts." He printed several documents and handed them to me. "These are the financial statements for the past 6 years. As you can see, the company has generated very consistent revenue." I stared at the numbers, my hands trembling. The annual profits were substantial, more than enough to explain the regular deposits in the trust account statements I had seen yesterday. But Harold retired, I said weakly. He wasn't working anymore. He stepped back from daily operations, certainly. But he maintained oversight and handled major client relationships, Raj explained. The actual renovation work has been managed by Miguel Santos. You know Miguel, don't you? I nodded slowly. Miguel had worked for Harold for 15 years, starting as a young apprentice and becoming Harold's most trusted foreman. He had been at the funeral, one of the few people there who had seemed genuinely devastated by Harold's death. Miguel has essentially been running the company for 6 years, Raj continued. Harold structured the arrangement. So Miguel receives performance bonuses based on profit margins, which kept him motivated and loyal. It has been tremendously successful for everyone involved. Why didn't Harold tell me about any of this? The question came out as barely a whisper. Raj hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Mrs. Anderson, this may not be appropriate for me to say, but Harold was concerned about family financial pressures. He mentioned that Derek had been struggling economically and that his wife had expensive preferences. Harold worried that if the family knew about the continued business income, there would be expectations that might compromise your long-term security. The pieces were falling into place with devastating clarity. Every time Derek had asked Harold for financial help, every time Crystal had made pointed comments about our comfortable lifestyle, Harold had been calculating how to assist our son without jeopardizing my future independence. He was protecting me, I said, the words heavy with understanding. He was protecting both of you in different ways, Raj said gently. The financial assistance he provided Derek over the years was substantial, but it came from business operating funds, not from your personal assets, and he was very careful to document everything as formal business loans. He pulled out another folder. These are copies of all loan agreements between the business and your son. Harold insisted on treating them as legitimate business transactions with payment schedules and interest calculations. I opened the folder with shaking hands, page after page of loan documentation, each one signed by both Harold and Derek. The amounts were staggering, tens of thousands of dollars over 6 years, ostensibly for Derek's various investment opportunities and business ventures. Has Derek been making payments on these loans? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Raj's expression grew uncomfortable. The payment record shows significant delinquencies. As of last month, the outstanding balance, with accumulated interest totals, approximately $73,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. Derek owed my business, the family business, $73,000, while simultaneously telling me Harold had left nothing but debts. What happens to these loan obligations now? I asked. They transfer with all other business assets, Raj explained. As the new owner of the trust, you have the legal right to demand immediate payment, restructure the terms, or pursue collection through normal business channels. I thought about Derek and Crystal measuring my kitchen, planning their renovations, discussing when they could start showing their house to potential buyers. They were so confident, so certain they deserved everything Harold had built. There is something else you should know, Raj said, his voice even more cautious. Last month, Derek contacted me directly. He said that with Harold's death, he would be taking over management of all business affairs. He requested a complete transfer of ownership documents and access to all financial records. And what did you tell him? I told him I had need written authorization from the trust beneficiary, from you, before I could provide any information or transfer any authority. He seemed quite surprised that you had any involvement in the business structure. So Derek had been planning to claim the business along with my house, assuming I was too grief-stricken and financially naive to understand what was happening. The betrayal cut deeper than I had thought possible. Raj, I need to ask you something confidentially, I said. If I wanted to maintain the current business structure with Miguel continuing to handle operations, would that be practical? Absolutely, Raj replied. Miguel has been hoping to hear from you. Actually, he has been worried about his job security and the company's future. If you are willing to maintain the existing arrangement, I believe you would find him extremely reliable and grateful for the stability. I gathered all the documents, my mind racing with implications. The business was mine. Derek's substantial debt was real and legally enforceable, and neither he nor Crystal had any idea that their grand plans were built on fundamental misunderstandings. "I would like to schedule a meeting with Miguel as soon as possible," I said. "And I want to understand all my options regarding the outstanding loan obligations." "Of course," Raj said. "Shall I call Miguel this afternoon?" "Yes, please. And Raj, I would appreciate it if this conversation remained completely confidential for now." "Absolutely. Client confidentiality is fundamental to our practice." As I drove home, my phone chimed with another text from Crystal. "Eleanor, the realtor, will be here at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Please make sure the house is presentable and remove any personal items that might distract potential buyers. First impressions are crucial in this market." I stared at the message for a long moment before putting my phone away without responding. Let them schedule their realtor visit. Let them imagine their future in my house, planning how to spend money they assumed they would inherit. They had no idea that the foundation supporting their dreams was about to crumble beneath them. That evening, I sat in Harold's workshop for the first time since his death, surrounded by his carefully organized tools and project notes. Now I understood why he had been so meticulous about documentation, why he had insisted on proper paperwork for every transaction. He had been building a fortress around me, one document at a time, one protective measure at a time. Tomorrow, I would start learning how strong those walls really were. Miguel Santos' weathered hands wrapped around his coffee mug as we sat in my kitchen the next morning. At 48, he still had the lean build and calloused palms of a craftsman who took pride in quality work. But his dark eyes held an uncertainty I had never seen before. "Mrs. Anderson, I have to be honest with you," he said, his slight accent making his words more musical than Derek's flat Midwestern tone. "I have been very worried since Mr. Harold died. Derek came to the workshop last week, asking questions about equipment values and current contracts. He seemed to be evaluating everything, like he was planning to sell it all." I poured myself more coffee, using the familiar routine to steady my nerves. "Miguel, what exactly did my son tell you?" He said the family was facing financial difficulties, that hard decisions needed to be made about business operations. He wanted a complete inventory of all tools, equipment, and active contracts. Miguel's jaw tightened with obvious frustration. He also asked for keys to the workshop and the storage facility. "And what did you tell him?" "That I needed to speak with whoever was actually authorized to make those decisions. Mr. Harold always told me that if anything happened to him, I should wait for proper instructions from the legal owner." He paused, meeting my eyes directly. He never said that would be Derek. Relief flooded through me. Harold had prepared for this scenario, ensuring Miguel would be a guardian of the business, rather than simply transferring authority to whoever claimed it. "Miguel, I need to share something with you, but I need your word that this conversation stays private for now." His expression grew serious. "You have it, Mrs. Anderson. I always keep business matters confidential." I spread the documents Raj had given me yesterday across the kitchen table. "I own Anderson Custom Renovations, not Derek, not the estate. Me. Harold transferred everything into a trust 6 years ago, and I am the sole beneficiary." Miguel's eyes widened as he studied the papers. "Well, I will be damned. Sorry, Mrs. Anderson. But Mr. Harold was always thinking ahead like that. He was a smart man who cared about doing things right. The business has been very profitable under your management," I continued. "According to these records, you have built an excellent reputation with reliable clients." Miguel's chest swelled with pride. "We do good work, Mrs. Anderson. Quality renovations at fair prices. Mr. Harold taught me that satisfied customers are worth more than any single big job." "I want you to continue exactly as you have been," I said. "But I need to understand something. Derek has been less than honest about our family's financial situation. Can you tell me about any interactions you have had with him regarding business matters?" Miguel's expression darkened considerably. "There have been several over the years. He would show up at job sites when Mr. Harold wasn't around, asking about upcoming payments from clients, wanting to know how much cash we had available. Sometimes he would hint that maybe the business could help him out with temporary loans for investment opportunities. And what did you tell him? That he needed to talk to his father about financial matters. Miguel's voice grew harder. I am not stupid, Mrs. Anderson. I could see what was happening. Last year, he actually followed me to the bank when I went to deposit payment from the Johnson kitchen remodel, said it was just coincidence. But he seemed very interested in talking to the teller about our deposit amounts. My stomach clenched. Derek had been monitoring business income, probably timing his requests for financial help to coincide with our largest client payments. Miguel, I need complete honesty here. Do you think Derek understands how profitable this business has been? Miguel was quiet for a moment, considering carefully. I think he knows it is more than the family admitted, but I don't think he knows the full extent. Mr. Harold was very careful about keeping business and personal finances separate, at least in what people could see. What do you mean by that? Well, your husband was smart about managing Derek's expectations, Miguel explained. When Derek would ask for money, Mr. Harold would tell him the business was struggling, that margins were tight, but then he would find a way to help anyway, usually as a loan from the business account rather than from family savings. Miguel pulled out a small spiral notebook, worn from years of use. I keep track of everything, Mrs. Anderson. Mr. Harold taught me that good records prevent problems later. According to my notes, Derek has received business loans totaling about $78,000 over the past 6 years. The amount was even higher than what Raj had calculated. Loans, not gifts. That is what I mean about Mr. Harold being smart, Miguel said. He would structure them as formal loans with payment schedules and everything. But when Derek would miss payments, Mr. Harold would just extend the terms rather than demanding immediate payment. So Derek thinks the money was gifts. Derek acts like the money was gifts, Miguel corrected. Whether he really believes it or just pretends to believe it, I cannot say, but he never treated those transactions like real debts. As if summoned by our conversation, I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Through the kitchen window, I could see Derek's silver Honda Accord parked behind Miguel's work truck. That is my son, I said quietly. I don't want him to know we have been discussing business matters. Miguel nodded and quickly gathered the papers I had shown him. Mrs. Anderson, whatever you decide to do, you have my complete support. Mr. Harold was a good man, and he trusted you enough to put everything in your name. That is good enough for me. Derek entered through the back door without knocking, a habit that had always irritated Harold, but which I had learned to tolerate over the years. Morning, Mom, he said, barely acknowledging Miguel. I didn't realize you had company. Miguel stopped by to check on me, I said smoothly. You know how thoughtful the crew has always been about family matters, right? Derek's attention was already elsewhere, his eyes scanning the kitchen as if evaluating its potential for renovation. Actually, Miguel, I am glad you are here. We need to discuss the business situation. Miguel's expression became carefully neutral. The business situation, with Dad gone. There are going to be changes, Derek announced. The family needs to make practical decisions about assets and ongoing obligations. I watched this exchange with fascination. Derek was so confident, so certain of his authority. He had no idea he was trying to claim something that had never belonged to him. What kind of changes? Miguel asked. Well, we need to evaluate whether it makes sense to continue operations or whether it would be better to liquidate assets and settle outstanding debts, Derek said casually, as if he were discussing weekend plans. I see. And who is making these decisions? Derek blinked, clearly not expecting the question. The family, obviously. I will be handling Dad's business affairs going forward. Will you now? Miguel's voice was carefully controlled, but I caught the slight emphasis on you. Mom, you should probably put on a fresh pot of coffee, Derek said, dismissing me as he always had when he considered conversations too important for my participation. Miguel and I need to discuss some technical details, but I didn't move. For the first time in years, I held my ground. I will stay. Thank you. This is my kitchen, and Miguel is my guest. Derek looked surprised but shrugged. Fine. Miguel, I will need you to prepare a complete inventory of all equipment, vehicles, and active contracts. I will also need access to business bank accounts so I can assess the current financial situation. I would be happy to help with that, Miguel said carefully. Who should I coordinate with regarding authorization for account access? With me, obviously, Derek replied, his confidence beginning to waver slightly. And you have legal authority to access Anderson Custom Renovations accounts, because I am Harold Anderson's son. And primary heir, Derek said, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. I see. And do you have documentation showing you are authorized to act on behalf of the business? The kitchen fell silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic on Cedar Avenue. Derek's face was flushing red, and I could see him struggling between irritation and uncertainty. Look, Miguel, I don't think you understand the situation, Derek said, his voice taking on the condescending tone he used when he felt challenged. This isn't adversarial. I am trying to organize Dad's affairs and make sure everyone is taken care of properly. But I cannot do that if you are going to create obstacles. I am not trying to create obstacles, Miguel replied evenly. I am trying to understand who has the authority to give me instructions. Your father was very specific about following proper procedures and maintaining clear documentation. Derek turned to me, clearly expecting support. Mom, explain to Miguel that I am handling Dad's business matters now. I looked at my son. This man who was planning to sell my house while I was still grieving, who had accumulated nearly $80,000 in business debt while claiming Harold left nothing behind, and made my decision. Actually, Derek, I think Miguel is absolutely right to ask for proper documentation, I said quietly. Your father was always very careful about these things. Surely you can appreciate the importance of following legal procedures. Derek stared at me as if I had grown a second head. What are you talking about? I am talking about ensuring everything is handled properly and legally, I said. Surely you can understand why that matters. For the first time since this conversation began, Derek looked uncertain, and watching that uncertainty creep across his features, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades: power. The phone call came at 6:30 in the morning, 4 days after my confrontation with Derek in the kitchen. I had been expecting it. Anger always followed confusion with Derek, especially when his assumed authority was questioned. Mom, we need to talk. Right now, Derek's voice was tight with barely controlled rage. Crystal and I are coming over, and we are going to settle this business nonsense once and for all. It is quite early, Derek. This couldn't wait until a more reasonable hour? This has waited long enough, he snapped. We will be there in 15 minutes. The line went dead before I could respond. I took my time getting dressed. Choosing a navy blue blouse that Harold had always said brought out my eyes. If this was going to be a confrontation, I intended to face it with dignity. They arrived exactly 15 minutes later, Crystal's heels clicking aggressively on my front steps. I opened the door before they could pound on it, maintaining the small advantage of being the hostess in my own home. Good morning, I said pleasantly, as if this were a social visit. Crystal pushed past me into the living room, her designer handbag clutched like a weapon. Derek followed, his face grim with determination. They both remained standing, positioning themselves between me and the front door in what I recognized as an intimidation tactic. Mom, I don't know what kind of game you think you are playing, Derek began. But Miguel Santos called yesterday and said he cannot provide business information without proper authorization. What did you tell him? I settled into Harold's favorite recliner, the one with the best view of the entire room. I told him to follow proper legal procedures. Your father would have expected nothing less: proper procedures. Crystal's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Derek is Harold's son and heir. What more authorization could anyone possibly need? Legal authorization, I said calmly. The kind that comes with actual ownership and documented authority. Derek's eyes narrowed dangerously. What are you talking about? Dad's will leaves everything to the family. I am the executor, which means I handle all assets until probate is settled. Actually, Derek, that is not entirely accurate. I reached for the folder I had placed on the side table, the one containing all the documents from my bank visit and meeting with Raj Patel. Derek and Crystal both tensed as I opened it. Your father's will does leave his personal possessions and this house to the family, I continued. But Anderson Custom Renovations isn't part of his personal estate. It hasn't been for 6 years. What are you talking about? Derek demanded, his voice rising. I pulled out the trust documents and set them on the coffee table between us. Anderson Custom Renovations has been owned by the Anderson Custom Renovations Trust since 2017. I am the sole beneficiary of that trust. The silence that followed was deafening. Crystal reached for the documents first, her manicured fingers trembling as she scanned the legal language. Derek read over her shoulder, his face growing pale. This is impossible, Crystal whispered. You don't know anything about business. You cannot even operate a smartphone properly. You are absolutely right, I said. I don't know much about business operations, but apparently your father understood things about our family dynamics that I was too trusting to see. Derek collapsed onto the sofa as if his legs had given out. But the business was struggling. Dad always said cash flow was tight, that there was barely enough to cover expenses. The business has been quite profitable. Actually, I handed him the financial statements Raj had provided. Here are the records for the past 6 years. Watching Derek's face as he processed the numbers was like watching someone realize they had been playing checkers while everyone else was playing chess. These profits, Derek's voice was barely audible. Where did this money go? Some of it went to you, Derek. Quite a lot of it, actually. I pulled out the loan documentation Miguel had shared with me, $78,000 over 6 years, to be exact. Crystal grabbed the loan papers, her eyes scanning frantically. These say loans, Derek. You told me those were gifts. You said your father was helping us establish our future. They were gifts, Derek said, but his voice lacked conviction. Dad never mentioned payment schedules. He never even brought up repayment. Actually, he did, I said quietly. Raj Patel has documentation of every conversation, every missed payment, every time your father chose to extend terms rather than demand what you owed. I watched as the reality of their situation began to dawn on them. Derek had built his entire financial plan on the assumption that Harold's generosity would continue indefinitely. He would probably made commitments, taken on debt, planned a lifestyle based on money he had assumed was his inheritance. But this doesn't change anything fundamental, Crystal said suddenly, her voice taking on a desperate edge. The house still goes to Derek. That is worth more than some small renovation business, is it? I asked mildly. Crystal's eyes flashed with something between panic and rage. Don't play games, Eleanor. This house is worth at least $350,000. You know that. You are absolutely right. It is a beautiful property. Of course, there is the matter of the outstanding mortgage. Derek looked up sharply. What mortgage? Dad said. The house was paid off years ago. It was paid off, I said. But 2 years ago, your father took out a substantial home equity loan. The proceeds were transferred into the Anderson Custom Renovations Trust account, which means they became part of my business inheritance. I pulled out the final set of documents, the ones I had discovered in Harold's filing cabinet yesterday, carefully organized in a folder labeled Eleanor's Security Fund. A home equity loan for $275,000, I continued. The proceeds were used to expand the business equipment inventory and establish cash reserves for my future security. Crystal's face went white as she studied the loan documentation. That is not possible. We would have known. We would have had to sign something. Your father was the sole owner of this house at the time, I said. I was listed as a spouse with survivorship rights, but not as a co-owner. He didn't need anyone else's signature. Derek stared at the papers, as if they were written in a foreign language. But why would he do this? Why would he mortgage the house just to put money in a business trust? For the first time since this conversation began, I allowed my carefully controlled emotions to show. Because he was protecting me, Derek. He was ensuring that no matter what happened, I would have financial independence and security. Protecting you from what? Derek's voice was hoarse. From this, I said, gesturing to the scene unfolding in my living room, from being pushed out of my own home by family members who saw me as an inconvenience rather than a person, from being left with nothing while others claimed what they assumed they deserved. Crystal's composure finally cracked completely. You manipulated him. You convinced a sick old man to change everything to benefit yourself. Your father wasn't sick when he established these trusts. Crystal, he was planning ahead, and the fact that he felt the need to protect me from this scenario should tell you something about his assessment of our family dynamics. Derek's hands were shaking as he set down the documents. Mom, surely we can work something out. You don't really want to run a renovation business. And this house has been our family home for decades. It should stay in the family. It is staying in the family, Derek. It is staying with me. But the mortgage payments, Crystal said desperately. How will you possibly afford mortgage payments on a fixed income? The same way your father intended, I replied. With income from Anderson Custom Renovations, Miguel assures me the business is quite stable, and Raj says the cash flow will easily cover the loan payments, with plenty remaining for my living expenses. I stood up, smoothing my blouse. Now, I believe you mentioned something about my moving out. I think that is still an excellent suggestion. Not for me, of course, but I am sure you will find somewhere lovely to start fresh. Derek looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. Mom, you cannot be serious. After everything Dad did for our family. After all the love and support, your father did everything for our family, Derek. He loved me enough to ensure I would never be at anyone's mercy, including my own sons, and now I understand exactly how much I needed that protection. Crystal was already at the door, her face twisted with rage and disbelief. This isn't finished, Eleanor. We will fight this. We will contest everything in court. You are welcome to try, I said calmly. But you should know that everything your father did was completely legal and properly documented. Raj Patel is very thorough, and he has already provided copies of all relevant paperwork to my attorney. Derek paused at the door, his expression a mixture of confusion and hurt. I don't understand, Mom. Why are you doing this to us? I am not doing anything to you, Derek, I said. I am simply refusing to let you do it to me. After they left, I sat alone in the sudden quiet of my house. Truly my house, and felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. For the first time since I was a young woman, I was completely financially independent. I owned my home, my business, my future. No one could vote me out of my own life. No one could decide I was too old or too much trouble. Harold had given me more than financial security. He had given me the power to choose my own path. 8 months later, I stood on the deck of my new lake house in Brainerd, watching the morning sun paint golden streaks across Gull Lake. But today wasn't just another peaceful morning. It was the day of my monthly support group meeting. Something that had grown from Susan Chen's initial request into the most meaningful work of my life. The dining room of my lake house had been transformed into a safe haven where women gathered to share stories that society often preferred to ignore. There was Margaret, 76, whose son had convinced her to sign over power of attorney, then systematically drained her savings. Linda, 68, whose daughter had moved in temporarily 3 years ago, and now treated her like an unwelcome tenant in her own home. Carol, 72, whose family had convinced her she was too confused to manage her finances while they redirected her pension payments. Each month, we sat around my grandmother's oak table, the one piece of furniture I had fought Derek to keep, and these women found their voices again. Not just their legal rights, though we covered those thoroughly with help from Patricia Williams, who volunteered her time. More importantly, they rediscovered their worth as human beings who deserved respect rather than exploitation. Eleanor Margaret had said last month, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "You saved my life. Not just my money, my actual life. I was ready to. Well, I thought there was no point in fighting anymore. That is when I understood what Harold had really given me. Not just financial independence, but the power to show other women that they could demand dignity. That age didn't disqualify them from respect. That family love shouldn't require surrendering their autonomy." Anderson Custom Renovations continued to thrive under Miguel's management. He called every Tuesday morning to update me on current projects and upcoming contracts, and quarterly profits were automatically deposited into my personal account. I had maintained exactly the structure Harold had created, and everyone involved seemed happier for the stability. The lake house had been an unexpected discovery. While researching properties in central Minnesota, I had learned that Harold had purchased it 4 years ago through the Renovation Business Trust. Raj had found the deed while organizing business assets, along with a handwritten note from Harold for Eleanor's retirement, when she is ready for quiet mornings and no demands on her time. Even after his death, my husband was still taking care of me. This morning was special because my attorney was driving up from the Twin Cities to finalize the last piece of business from my previous life. Derek and Crystal had indeed tried to contest the trust arrangements, hiring an expensive law firm that specialized in elder financial abuse cases. The investigation had not gone well for them. Not only were all of Harold's arrangements completely legal and properly executed, but Derek's debt to the business had grown substantially due to accumulated interest and legal fees. The total now exceeded $86,000. The doorbell chimed at exactly 10 of the clock. Patricia Williams believed punctuality reflected character, and her calm competence had been invaluable during the more challenging aspects of this legal battle. "Good morning, Eleanor," she said, settling into the comfortable chair by the window that had become her usual spot during our meetings. "I have the final settlement agreement for your review." I poured coffee from the French press I had mastered, another small symbol of my independence, and sat across from her. How did they respond to the final terms? Patricia's expression suggested controlled satisfaction, about as well as you would expect. Derek's attorney spent considerable time arguing that family relationships should supersede business obligations. But the law is quite clear about legitimate debt collection. She handed me the settlement documents. After 8 months of legal maneuvering, Derek and Crystal had agreed to a payment plan that would take them 7 years to complete. Assuming they never missed a payment, they made one final attempt to negotiate some kind of family forgiveness clause. Patricia continued, "Derek actually became emotional in the final meeting, claiming you were destroying your relationship with your only son over money." "And what did you tell them?" I asked. "I reminded them that I was representing your financial interests, not your family relationships, though I may have mentioned that most mothers don't have to hire attorneys to collect legitimate debts from their children." The settlement also included provisions that particularly satisfied me. If Derek and Crystal defaulted on any payments, the business could legally garnish Derek's wages and place liens on any property they acquired. It was a safety net ensuring I would receive what was owed regardless of their future financial decisions. "There is one more thing," Patricia said, pulling out a separate envelope. "This was delivered to my office yesterday, addressed to you." The envelope bore Derek's familiar handwriting. Inside was a brief letter on plain stationery. "Mom, I know you probably will not forgive me for everything that happened, but I wanted you to know that I finally understand what Dad was trying to do. It took losing almost everything for me to realize how much I had taken for granted. Crystal and I are in marriage counseling, and I am working 2 jobs to meet the payment schedule. I hope someday you might be willing to have a conversation with me. I am sorry for all of it, Derek." I folded the letter carefully and set it aside. The apology seemed genuine, but it was 8 months too late, and motivated by consequences rather than genuine remorse. "Any response you would like me to convey?" Patricia asked. "No," I said. "If Derek wants to rebuild a relationship with me, he can do it the same way he will pay off his debt. gradually, consistently, and over time, proving his commitment through actions rather than words. After Patricia left, I took my coffee out to the deck and read Derek's letter again. The grief was still there, not just for Harold, but for the son I had thought I had raised, and the family relationships I had believed were genuine. But underneath the sadness was something stronger, a deep satisfaction that I had found the courage to demand the respect I deserved. When it mattered most, my phone rang, interrupting my reflection. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Hello, Mrs. Anderson? This is Susan Chen, Margaret's sister. I hope you don't mind me calling, but my sister mentioned your situation, and I wondered if you might be interested in helping other women who have faced similar challenges." I remembered Susan vaguely, a social worker who specialized in elder advocacy. "What did you have in mind?" "I am organizing a support group for women who have experienced financial manipulation by family members. Your story could help other women understand their rights and find the courage to protect themselves." The request surprised me. I am not sure what I could offer. "You would be amazed how many women find themselves in similar situations," Susan continued. "Adult children who feel entitled to their parents' assets, family members who mistake kindness for weakness, relatives who assume aging equals helplessness. Your experience could show them that it is possible to stand up for themselves." I thought about this while watching a loon dive for fish in the lake. 8 months ago, I had been a grieving widow facing the loss of my home at the hands of my own son. Today, I was financially independent, living exactly where I chose to live, answerable to no one but myself. "When would you like me to speak?" I asked. "Really? You will do it?" Susan's relief was audible. "I think I will," I said, "but not about revenge or legal battles. I want to talk about the difference between being a loving family member and being a doormat, about the importance of understanding your own financial situation, about recognizing when protection becomes necessary." We scheduled the presentation for the following month. After hanging up, I realized that helping other women navigate similar situations felt like a purpose, a way to honor both Harold's protection and my own hard-won independence. That evening, I did something I had started doing every night since moving to the lake house. I sat on my deck with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, taking time to appreciate the simple fact that this view, this peace, this freedom belonged entirely to me. No one could take it away. No one could vote me out of my own life. No one could decide I was too old or too much trouble to deserve respect. The lake was quiet, except for the gentle lapping of waves and the distant call of night birds settling in for the evening. Tomorrow I would tend to my garden, perhaps drive into town for lunch at the little cafe, where the owner always saved me the table, overlooking the lake. Simple pleasures that belonged entirely to me. Derek's debt would be paid eventually, whether he managed it responsibly or the business had to pursue legal collection. The settlement ensured that justice would be served, regardless of his choices. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was the knowledge that I had found the strength to demand the dignity I deserved. As the last light faded from the sky, I raised my glass in a silent toast to Harold, wherever he was. He had loved me enough to ensure I would never be helpless, never be dependent on the mercy of people who saw me as expendable. He had loved me enough to give me everything I needed to pass the test when it came. The lake continued its eternal conversation with the shore, and I sat in my own home, on my own deck, living my own life, finally understanding what true independence meant. It meant never again having to beg for respect that should have been mine by right. It meant peace. What would you do if you found yourself in my situation? Have you ever experienced family members who mistake your kindness for weakness? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know what city you are watching from, so I can see how far this story travels. Your experiences and insights help other viewers who might be facing similar challenges.